Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody, our members and our guests. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our discussion about the public education budget. Before we begin, I would just like to remind everyone to please mute yourselves throughout the presentation and the discussion. And if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat for the Q&A session after the presentation. A reminder that the session is going to be recorded and it will be accessible on the League's YouTube channel. I just would like to begin by congratulating Broward County Schools, yay, to them for earning an A rating for the second year in a row. So, woo! To all the teachers and administrators and the media specialists and everybody that works together in our schools, in our public schools, to really help our students. And I'd also just like to introduce our two co-presidents, Suzette Hyde and Allie Myers. Suzette and Allie, do you want to add anything else before we go on? Okay, I guess not. All right. And now I'd like to introduce our two presenters for tonight from Families for Strong Public Schools. Damaris Allen is the Executive Director of Families for Strong Public Schools and a longtime public education advocate. She has organized and led local and statewide efforts to increase funding equity, protect student rights, and ensure that families and communities are informed and empowered. Amy Marie Granger Welch is a community organizer and parent advocate. She works closely with school board leaders, grassroots groups, and advocacy coalitions to elevate family and student voices across Florida. Thank you both so much for being here tonight. I'd just like to tell you a little bit about their organization, Families for Strong Public Schools. Families for Strong Public Schools is a nonpartisan grassroots advocacy network working to protect and strengthen Florida's public schools. They provide tools and resources to help families and allies understand how education policy impacts their communities and how they can take action. So here's how you can plug into their resources. You can go to their website, which I have put the URL in the chat, which is www.strongflschools.com, to explore their current priorities, their toolkits, and their reports. I highly recommend that you sign up for their Take Action Tuesdays, which are really helpful. They're a weekly email with a quick high impact action to support some issue dealing with public education. And it's so useful to me anyway to keep on track of, well, what is there that I've got to do now? Or what can I do? It helps you makes you feel empowered, you know? You can also learn how to join local campaigns, attend upcoming events, and you can download organizing resources, which could be useful for us. Please follow them also on social media at Strong FL Schools and sign up on their website to stay connected. They said they're excited to be here with us tonight in Broward, and they deeply appreciate the League's continued commitment to strong, equitable public education in Florida. So let's give a warm welcome to Damaris and Amy. I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate getting to come to talk with you tonight. It's so important. Every little action you take makes a difference. And I think people so often forget that something as simple as an email can have a huge impact. And we saw that around AP, IB, and ACE funding this session, right? That was a great example of things that are good. That happened. So the first thing I failed to put a slide in, but I do want to mention that the reconciliation package did pass both the House and the Senate. There are some impacts on public schools. Some are direct impacts. One of those is that a voucher bill passed, allowing a dollar for dollar tax credit to go towards a federal voucher program. Now, it isn't in every state. It's only in states. It will be in ours because it's only allowed in states that have a scholarship granting organization or a scholarship funding organization, as we call them here. And so it will allow there to be additional funds for vouchers from the federal government. The bill is significantly better than it was originally, thanks to a lot of advocacy. The other things that will have an indirect impact on, or another direct impact on schools, is the impacts on Medicaid and things like that, funding, which won't roll around until 2027. So we're not going to see the direct impacts of those immediately, but we are going to start to see them happen in 2027. Amy, if you want to go to the first slide. Okay, so now I know an article dropped today on impoundment, and so one of the things that we're dealing with right now is there is an impoundment on federal funds, and this is impacting our school districts as we speak. So what is an impoundment? An impoundment is when the president of the executive branch decides to hold back funds or delay funds that were already approved by Congress. So it's important to recognize that these funds were approved in March, they were signed off by the president, and now the president is saying that they're withholding these funds because they don't align with the president's priorities. And so that's, if you'll hit the next slide for me. For Florida, that means that it's about, for this federal government is withholding about $6.8 billion in federal funds. And for Florida, it's about 398 million plus dollars that are being withheld. And if you'll hit the next slide, we'll see how that breaks down. So this is something that is impacting us right now. We have some, and as I mentioned before, everyone hopped on the call. Some of this information we're getting as time goes on. So some of this, I'm going to go through some Broward numbers. Those were numbers we just received like 3 hours ago, I believe. So Florida, for the funding that is being withheld is Title I-C, which is around migrant education programs. You can see that $17 million Title II-A, which is programs to improve to help with teachers and principals and other school leaders. You have $124 million plus dollars. You can see this pretty clearly laid out. Title III-A funding is being held back for English language learners. Title IV-A, student academic support, and Title IV-B, which supports the state child welfare systems. And so this is going to have a huge impact on all of our school districts, and it's happening right now. In addition to that, the funding that is being held back is for adult literacy education and integrated literacy and civics education, which really works on language instruction and civics education through that. And as any of us know, that our adults need just as much support as our kids, and that by supporting our adult population, we are also supporting our children. And so this is going to have a huge impact on our schools and on the programs that we can offer for our families. Next slide. And these are the numbers that we have for Broward. Now, this is the amount of funding that is currently being withheld that you should have received in Broward County on July 1st. And so you can see it's significant. It's about $20 million that's being held back in these three programs. I don't have the numbers on the other programs. These were the three that were reported in the report. And actually, I can probably drop the link to this in the chat right now. If you want to go back and check on this later, you can see a link that I'm dropping in the chat. It has an article on the impoundments, and then you can look through how other districts in Florida are going to be impacted, and then how Broward is going to be impacted as well. Next slide. Well, we don't want to just accept this as it is. And so we have an opportunity, which we have just done as well, that you can go ahead and email members of Congress and let them know that this is not this is not how it should be, that this is not good for kids, this is not good for families, this is not good for our school districts. I just dropped the link in the chat. There's also a QR code. If you happen to have a phone next to you, you can scan it. This takes you to a letter that you can edit, and it'll send it out to your members of the House, your federal members of the House and the Senate, and ask them to demand that this funding is released, because this is funding that has been voted on, and that our schools are frankly counting on, because it was in the budget, and the uncertainty is not good. Next slide. So unfortunately, I don't have a ton of good news when it comes to federal funding. And so right now we're in the process of going through the federal budget, which works fairly similarly to our state education budget. Each department comes up with a proposal. This is from the Department of Education's proposal. The president presents a budget that's largely ceremonial, just like our governor presents a budget. And one of the things, because this budget is so lengthy and complicated, one of the things I wanted to highlight is these are all the line items that the Department of Education has proposed to zero out. So those are all of the places that we previously had funding in millions of dollars, that are now at zero. And you'll notice, if you could see this, and I'm happy to send this around later so you can make it larger, but you'll notice migrant education is zeroed out. English language learners are zeroed out. There's a lot of opportunity to encourage people to go into teaching that is zeroed out. And so things that our students and our schools and our communities desperately need are being removed from the federal education budget. And why this is really important to Florida is Florida receives a significant amount of money from the federal budget for our students. So about 17.8% of our per student's budget comes from the federal government. So we're one of the higher states that receives funding for our students. Some other things that are pulled out of there are zeroed out, are resources for community schools and things like that. So some really, really not great things are happening in our budget. And while Title I stayed the same and IDEA did have a slight raise, the fact that it stays the same tells us that it's a cut, because we know that inflation exists. And so anytime you don't do a raise to keep up with inflation, is it effectively a budget cut? And the amount that it increases for IDEA funding, which is for students with disabilities, that the increase is to account for early childhood learning. And so it's not really an additional amount of funds to help students who are in schools now. Next slide, and I'm going to hand it over to Amy.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you so much for having us here today. As they said, my name is Amy Marie. I basically just work in Florida, trying to figure out what's going on in Florida. Obviously, I think we all know about how long it took for the budget to even get released. So this will just be a broad overview of the Florida education budget. We'll walk you through the numbers, the shifts, and what they mean for our students, teachers, and schools, and we'll explore some of the changes to the FEFP, the continued expansions of voucher programs and early learning cuts, and the very real consequences of the policy choices being made in Tallahassee. So let's start with the Total Florida Education Finance Program, or the FEFP. I'm going to try to make sure I spell out the acronyms, because I think it's important to know what they mean. That is the main source of state funding for our public schools. This year's total comes in at just under 15.9 billion, which represents a $383.4 million increase. So about 2.5% over last year. And at first glance, this might look like progress, but when you account for inflation, population growth, and rising student needs, the increase simply doesn't go far enough, as we know. Let's look at voucher expansion. So where is that funding going? Voucher programs paid from the FEFP, again, the Florida Education Finance Program, officially called the Family Empowerment Scholarship, which is the FES, have seen a dramatic increase. Funding jumped from 3.19 billion to 3.84 billion. So that's a 20% increase in just 1 year. That means nearly 1 in every $4 in the FEFP is now going to private education vouchers. And this trend continues Florida's rapid push towards privatization without the same oversight, transparency, or accountability that's expected from our public schools. The base student allocation, the BSA. So we're going to talk about how much funding is reaching each one of our students. The base student allocation is the foundational amount districts receive per student. It increased by just $41.62, or 0.8%. That's less than $1 per week. When you factor in inflation, rising operating costs, staffing shortages, this minimal increase fails to meet the basic needs of our public schools. It's not enough to sustain competitive salaries, update aging facilities, or provide the real resources that our students deserve. A huge issue with the budget is this piece. It's the cut to our early learning programs. Overall, early childhood education saw a $97 million cut, and most of that coming from school readiness programs, which serve working families with limited incomes. That's a 6.7% decrease. VPK also saw a decrease despite zero increase in the per child amount, still stuck at 3,029. This is deeply short-sighted, as we know. We know from research that investments in early childhood education produce some of the highest returns. Cutting early learning while increasing private school vouchers is not just bad policy, it's bad economics for our state. So some key takeaways. Here's the big picture. Early learning investments are down nearly 6% despite growing need. Vouchers now consume almost a quarter of public education funds. The per student increase is negligible and fails to cover inflation or real costs. And altogether, this budget reflects a clear policy choice to prioritize privatization over public education equity. And this is not about improving student outcomes for all students. It's about shifting our public resources into private hands. So I didn't want to be all doom and gloom. So we need to push back, stay informed. These are some things that you can do right now. Following trusted sources at strongfloridaschools.com. All of our social media is Strong FL Schools. We're on Instagram and Facebook mainly. We do have YouTube and some other thing. We have Blue Sky as well. And the Florida Policy Institute is a great resource for factual information that is nonpartisan as well. We are also nonpartisan. Join or organize an advocacy campaign in your community. Having community conversations around this is extremely important right now. Educating others, sharing what you are learning, especially with our families who may not know where their tax dollars are going. A large portion of students that are receiving vouchers are kindergarten families, or families that really haven't been in public schools before. Those are good families to be talking to about how this drains the resources from our public schools when they're making their choices. And most importantly, I am also a league member. I sit on the board for Hillsborough Pasco. Registering people to vote. I know that that's a core mission of the league, and getting people engaged on the issues. That's so important. We absolutely love partnering with our league here and all over the state and making sure that we're getting accurate information out and getting people registered to vote. So thank you for having us. I'm going to pass it on to Damaris.
And I will add, we didn't put this in here. I mentioned this earlier that our advocacy did work around funding this session. So this session, they looked at changing the way they funded AP, IB, ACE, career and technical education programs, dual enrollment programs. It was previously um, basically done in a way that made it incentivized school districts to have those programs. It was a almost like a bonus program for students who successfully completed those programs, and they looked at dropping that down into the base student allocation, which would have effectively taken a ton of money away from school districts, especially school districts who had a high participation rate and a high success rate, which would have directly impacted our students and their ability to take those courses. And Florida Florida said no. Our kids deserve this opportunity to succeed. They deserve this opportunity to grow and thrive, and sent roughly 200,000 emails. They made phone calls, they did postcard parties, and the legislature changed. And so our voices do matter. Our voices do, when we use them, they do have an impact. So it is so important to stay engaged. The other thing I wanted to highlight is we had a couple of charter school expansion bills that passed this session that it's really important to talk about, especially as we're talking about funding. So the charter conversion bill was what we like to call a zombie bill. We defeated it last session, and then it came back this session in just a little bit of a different form. We've always had a process to convert traditional public schools to charter schools. Previously, it required, this is messy, the majority of teachers and the majority of parents in that school to vote to convert that school. This bill removed the teacher voice from that option. So now it's just the majority of parents. So a simple majority of the parents in that school that make this decision about converting a public school to a charter school. And we saw this, the other thing that this does is it allows municipalities to look at taking all of the schools in their municipality and converting them to a charter school. We saw this in Newberry back when we had the previous version of this bill where the teachers and the parents voted around it. Some of them decided to convert, some of them didn't. And a lot of the sticking point on not converting was not everybody who went to the middle school lived in Newberry. We know that right now in Broward, Parkland City, the city of Parkland is considering this possibility. They're looking at doing a feasibility study. So there's an opportunity coming for you to get engaged and educate people around this issue, because there are so many things tied to this charter conversion bill. One, there's not a guarantee that if you live in a district now and your school district converts to charters, there's not a guarantee your kids are going to be able to go there, which which is a huge issue. If you don't have kids, it could impact your property values, because we all know that our property values are often tied to our schools and how well they do. And in addition to that, as we go into hurricane season, it's really important to recognize our public schools are our shelters, and charter schools are not required to keep up with the codes required to be a shelter. So that could literally put our communities in danger if we do not have that. And we all know, if you've ever had to evacuate from a hurricane, which most of us have if we have lived here for any length of time, that the difference in driving a mile to a shelter and driving 10 miles to a shelter could be hours when we're evacuating for a hurricane. And so it's really important that we are paying attention. So if you hear anything in your city or any rumblings of this, please let us know, because we want everyone to be informed about how this decision could impact them. And then the other thing that happened is, tucked in as the budget was expanded. Normally we're done with the budget long before we were. This was the longest session ever, not because it felt like it, but because it actually was an incredibly long session, because they couldn't make a decision. They couldn't come to a consensus around the budget. And And when they did, they added this co-location option for charters. And so what that does is if your school is considered under-enrolled, it allows a charter school to move into that school without paying any costs, and they can operate in that. Now, you can imagine what a drain this is going to be on the district, because if a charter school moves in, uses the building but doesn't provide any resources for using that building, it's going to cause a drain on resources because our public schools are going to have to maintain those buildings. They're going to have to pay the electricity. They're going to have to do all the things that come with having the building. Next slide. So we do have coming up on the 22nd, we are going to be doing another a Zoom just on charters, co-location and charter conversions. I can drop the link in the chat in just a second, but we would love for you to join us. We would love for you to invite others to join us during that time. It'll be a wonderful opportunity for people to ask questions and for us to dive a little bit deeper into it than we could here as well. Next slide. Now this is the easy part. Does anyone have any questions? Wait, I think you're muted. There you go.
Okay. Anybody want to ask a question? We got a lot of information. I'm sure somebody has a question or a comment. All right, well, I have a question. I have a couple questions. All right, about the Parkland probability or so is that like, if we wanted to find out more about that, should we go like to a Parkland City Commission meeting? I mean, where are they discussing that?
So it first came up in the Parkland City Council meeting a couple of weeks ago. We have a new organizer that is starting on the ground in Broward specifically around this issue, and she was at the meeting the other night. And the mayor mentioned that it was just so they could know for future reference. So we're not sure that they're going to move forward with it, but just in case, we're going to be sharing information out. So I would say, make sure you're signed up with us for emails. We'll be sending out information, because we will want people to be engaged, and we'll reach out to you too if we hear. We'll reach out to the league and let you know what's happening.
Because I'm confused about like, I think even Stoneman Douglas, I think, is still in Coral Springs, the city of Coral Springs, and it's not in the city of Parkland, but I could be wrong about that, but it's very,
I think that was one of the things that was mentioned was the high school was one of the challenges
okay.
in the conversion process.
Well, I can just say from my own personal experience, my daughter lives in Atlanta and in her county went all charter. And contrary to what people think, that all of this gives people choices, families get choices, you don't have any choice, because her kids still had to go to the geographically, zoned schools. And one of my grandsons didn't want to go to that high school. He wanted to go to, there were 3 high schools, in the county. He wanted to go to a different one because they had a focus on, I think, culinary or something. And he couldn't go there. And they told him, well, that school is full.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
choice is an illusion.
Yeah, that's one of we say it's the school's choice. It isn't actually. Parents and students don't get to choose the school. It's the school that makes that decision. That's the case for vouchers. It's the case for charter schools. I mean, sometimes there's a lottery, but it's still the school making that decision. You don't have a lot of power over the decision to go to that school. And often what you're giving up is your neighborhood school. And it just it is not always a good trade. You look at New Orleans is another great, an excellent study in what happens when you convert an entire district to a charter district. We have examples of them not doing as well.
Are there new messages? Okay, I don't see them. I can't see
I can
them.
see them.
Oh, okay.
What are some of the requirements for the public sector that are not required in charter schools. There's a Do you have the league side by side? That is actually like one of my favorite things to look at, to say, to see, is there's a league, the trifold. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes. Yes, I forget what it's called, but yes, it tells you the difference between the three schools. Yes, and it's a
Yeah.
great handout.
Let me see if I can pull that up. That is probably the best thing. Otherwise, it's going to vary based on individual things. Like as
Mhm.
each bill passes, they'll discuss that, whether it is in a voucher school, or whether whether it applies to a charter school or not. When it comes to voucher schools, there are almost no regulations. In fact, before everyone got on earlier today, I said one of the most fascinating things I find is on the Department of Education's website. As you go to pick a voucher school, it says, be sure to check with your child's future employer or your child's future college campus to make sure that they accept the transcript from the school that your child just went to. The vast majority of voucher schools are not accredited. Um, Last I checked, it was above 70% were unaccredited, and those who were accredited, they weren't accredited by the typical accreditation bodies you would think of when you think of a high quality public school. Thank you for dropping the trifold in there.
Yeah, there it goes. Yeah, that's a great handout. It very clearly explains the difference between the three levels. Okay, are there other questions? In the chat, because for some
No,
reason,
there.
it's not opening up for me.
What will happen with the unique
Um,
needs of school children who have their federal funding cut and no choices within a private city chapter school? So like if the funding is cut and they don't, I think we're experiencing it right now. I mean, if we're going to be really honest, first of all, IDEA has never been fully funded. The federal voucher program, and this to me is the most egregious thing, could potentially spend, what, I did the math the other day. It's 4.5 times what we spend a year in IDEA. And so, the problem is they're just not going to have their needs met. And without a Department of Education and without, there's
Mhm.
no way to really enforce it to ensure that their needs are met. And so I think that to me is what's so horrible about all of these things that are happening, is that we are failing to give kids what they need, to give families what they need. And I worry, and we've had a lot of discussions with Disability Rights Florida around this, worrying about what does it look like that we're not going to have kids that are included anymore, right? Like you're going to have it,
Mhm.
we're turning back the clock, and
Mhm.
it's unacceptable to me.
So, Damaris, I don't know if everybody knows what IDEA is.
Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it's basically the idea that everyone gets a free and appropriate public education, which we have never fully, public schools are really a promise that we have never lived up to, and we have not fully lived up to. And to me, instead of investing and looking at the challenges that we have faced over the years in public schools and where we have fallen short, and looked at ways to improve that, we've kind of said, okay, parents, it's all on you, go find a new option. And it's not acceptable to me.
About maybe well, I retired about 7 years ago, and about the last year I was working, the state legislature made it a requirement for your certification that you take an in-service in IDEA.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to tell you that I had never really known what that act was all about. And so one of the guidance counselors taught us, and it was eye-opening. And I immediately called my daughter in Atlanta because one of her kids, had learning difficulties. And I said, you need to throw this in their face. So she, used it, and it helped her to get the services that he needed and that he was entitled to. So, and just think of the difference in the attitude Okay, from then to now.
Yeah.
So, okay, there's a question from Suzette. Do we have a benchmark city, one that is getting it right for their demographics?
In Florida?
Anywhere? Come on.
Florida. I will say NASA right now is fighting a charter school coming into their schools. They're an A school district and they have 0 charters. They have 14 schools. They're a very small district, but they're all A schools and they're fighting the schools of hope. There is another bill, unfortunately.
Yeah, what is that? Schools of Hope.
Schools of hope are charter schools that can come in where a traditional public school is considered failing.
Mm,
And with the new legislation, any school ranking in the bottom 10th percentile in 3rd grade English or 4th grade math in 2 of the 3 past years is now eligible. Basically, laying out a welcome mat for high performing charters. So they've reduced the, like you can, it's easier to put a charter school in. So where you may have a great district with great schools, a school can still come in a little easier.
But I think
okay.
it's important to recognize when those schools come in, often what happens is they can remember our public schools, not necessarily charter schools, our public schools are the only schools that have to accept all students. So oftentimes you'll see a completely different code of conduct with a charter school. You'll see things like parents have to sign that they'll read with their kid every day. Parents have to sign that they will, and if they don't do those things, those kids are asked to leave. And so really what happens is they end up peeling off the top performers very intentionally, and so it creates this illusion that you've met the needs of the students, but you haven't. You've just pushed them out to another school. And I
Mhm.
think that's what's really tragic. And I'm not a huge fan of school grades, because we do an awful lot of testing, and I don't know that testing reveals how well a student does. But and to say who does this well, the challenge is, now that I've been doing a lot more national work, is every district has its own challenge, whatever it is, right? Like it, and some are more extreme, some are around funding, some are how they prioritize the use of funding, some are around how they lean heavily into technology rather than leaning into teachers, some are it all varies based on school district. But I don't know that anyone is, I would say that I could think of anyone off the top of my head that is doing it perfectly. I think probably when I started this work, I would have thought of like, oh, surely there's a school district in New York where they spend a lot of money, but money does often equal performance, right? Like long-term investment over time does often change student performance, but it's also not a magic cure, right? Like we have to, I think the challenge is that we have to be honest about where we're not meeting the mark, and I think school districts are afraid to do that just in general, and that makes it hard to
Mhm.
make a great school district.
Denise McFall said, I live in Parkland and walked out briefly when it was mentioned. Can you please update again?
So Parkland, the city of Parkland has requested to do a feasibility study on converting all of their traditional public schools to charter schools. So it would be a charter district. Um, my understanding is at the last meeting, the mayor said that they're just checking, so they might do it in the future, not that they had plans to do it.
Okay, and Ronnie commented, the funding does not follow transferred students until the next year. I assume, Ronnie, you're asking about if a student starts in a private school and then goes back to the public, what happens to their money that was given for them? I
Same with
guess
Right.
charters.
that's what you mean, Ronnie?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Uh-huh.
So both with charter and with private schools, it doesn't follow the student until the next count. So my student starts in a charter school or a private school and they move before the next count back to a traditional public school. The traditional public school has to take them and they will be they will be educating them without the funding following them until the next count. Counts happen 4 times a year.
Oh, okay. Does
And
it go back to them? Do me really? Are they getting this money back in their budgets?
And it doesn't come back. So there was some legislation a couple of years ago, I want to say it was 3 years ago now, that would have increased the number of counts because of this challenge. But it didn't see the light of day. Like it started and then it was encouraged to be pulled.
Mhm.
And so yeah, there are times that I mean, when you think about it, if a kid transfers from a public school into a private school, they're still going to have to pay, right? They may not get a voucher immediately, but they're still going to have to pay for those semesters when they come in. But that isn't the case when they come back from the to the public school. And
Okay.
there's some cases of people double dipping. We saw in this year's budget, um, where they're taking we have there's it's called personalized education program, or PEP. And those are vouchers for homeschool families. They get the same amount of money that traditional public schools do, students do per student. So they get the allocation for the security and for the like all the things that they don't have to have as a homeschool student. They get all of that funding. So there were some cases where people were homeschooling, saying they were homeschooling, taking the voucher, but then sending them to Florida Virtual or sending them in person to school and using that money to do things like dance lessons, buy furniture. They can buy all kinds of crazy things with it.
How many passes? How many did we?
Oh, 8,500 passes to
Disney passes, Universal. Uh, they can buy
Oh,
all sorts of fun things. Paddle boards, big screen TVs, well,
so
outdoor.
there's no accountability for how the money's spent, or there's no like you cannot spend it on XYZ.
They have to submit a form that says what the educational asks what the educational benefit is. And so for Disney, they'll say, we walked around Epcot. I mean, that's the thing that public schools, but parents usually pay for it, right? Like my kid went to Disney and Busch Gardens when he was in school.
Mhm.
They calculated something with the roller coasters for physics. I think I did that when I was in school, but my parents paid for it. I paid for it for my kids. The concern is we allow our our um, homeschool students to pay for things that if we ever saw a school district spending money in this way, there would be picketing outside of the school district office, and people would be
Right.
furious that they're wasting funds. I mean, just today, because I'm in some of these groups, I saw they're buying picnic benches, picnic tables for their backyard. People buy they have patio furniture for their patio school, and it's
Wow.
yeah. Those are probably the worst ones were like, which cruise can I get approved? Can I pay to go see Hamilton in New York? Surely that's a history program. Um, so
So they're given a check. They're given the money.
they turn in receipts with the form, and that gets approved, and then they get the check back if they have purchased it ahead of time. There's also a marketplace. So like if I wanted to buy a 50-inch TV, I don't have it, but if I could buy it off the marketplace, and then go pick it up from Best Buy, or it would get
Okay.
delivered to my house. And there's some restrictions, right? Like Disney passes can't be over, what is it, $298 or something like that. You can only buy furniture once every 2 years.
Okay. Denise says, how significant is this behavior? I guess, is this a common thing that it's really taken a big chunk of the money?
Yes. Yes.
8,500 passes. I think we did some simple math on that.
There were 39,000 homeschool students last year, a little over 39,000. And and every year, so there's a certain number of homeschool students that can participate in this every year, and it goes up, and in 2027 the cap is lifted. And there are literal whole Facebook groups dedicated to, oh, how can I spend this money? The other thing is if you have money left over, you can roll it into a 529 account and use it to pay for your kids' college. Um,
Wow.
So
Oh, wow. So that's not the voucher money. I mean, that's not
that
the
is
private.
vouchers.
Okay, so what about the private school? Like you're going to send your child to a private school.
So if you're going to send your child to a private school, you also have a certain amount of money that goes for that. If your private school happens to be less than the voucher, you can use your voucher funds to buy other things or to participate in other programs. That's very, very rare. Unless it's one of those pop-up, which these exist, pop-up schools that just has come around for the to have the voucher, or if it's sometimes online schools
Mhm.
are less. Those also are things that you can use it for. There's a list on the website, on the DOE website, of schools that accept vouchers, and you can look it up by your county, so you can see how many schools in Broward accept vouchers, and then you
Mhm.
can see how many students are in them, if it's accredited, all of those things.
Okay, Ronnie asks, as well as faith-based schools, they too get public funds / vouchers.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Isn't it true, or is it true that the majority of of students who are taking these vouchers are already enrolled in private schools?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's 69% of students in Florida that are taking the voucher that started taking the voucher after it was became universal, were already in private schools. Our number is lower than the national average, but that's because we've had vouchers since like 1998, I believe the first voucher
Mhm.
came to be. Maybe it's 99. It was in the 90s. And so we've had vouchers for a long time, and we were on the road to universal vouchers before we passed a universal voucher bill. So the year before our universal voucher bill passed, we were at 375% of the poverty level, with a caveat that it would increase by 25%, that every year we didn't reach the maximum, a certain number, we didn't use all of the voucher funds, it could keep increasing. So it would have been at 400% of the poverty level, which, if you look at what people make in Florida, the average salary, the vast majority of people were eligible for vouchers. The
Oh,
other thing that I didn't mention that is really, really important about vouchers, and this is also the concern with if we move to block grants, is that once parents take a voucher, you are basically signing away your federal protections. So because it's going to
mhm.
the parent is going to that school, this is actually in our voucher legislation. You are saying that you can't, like, so voucher schools don't have to provide any supports for students or anything like that. They don't have to be ADA compliant, all of those things. And so you don't have any recourse if you have moved to a school and your students not receiving any services. You can either pull them out or you can leave them there, but there's no more federal protections.
Oh my goodness.
So one of the things there, our governor is wandering around the state talking about how we are the school choice leaders. And he talks about 51% are using choice. And I think it's important that we understand that 40% choose public options out of that 51%. So they're choosing magnets, open enrollments, IB, ACE programs. So
Mhm.
that while that sounds like a huge number, again, 49% are picking their local public school. The majority of students in Florida are still, even with choice, choosing a public school option. So we know how many counties passed a millage for, like,
It was 13 out of 14.
I mean, it was a lifetime ago now, but it feels like it anyway. But in Florida, we know people value their public schools. A time and time again, they're voting for more money for our public schools because we see the value. We live in our counties. We know our kids are educated well. We know our teachers need to be paid more than 50th in the nation, and
Mhm.
Yeah,
so
we didn't even talk about that.
remember, we want to make sure people know that that rhetoric they hear that you're hearing, that 51% seems like a huge number, but when we pull 40 out of there, what is that? We know the math. So I think it's important that we have you have that information so that when someone says, "Oh, but I heard the governor say 51% choose who use this choice option." Well, yeah, 40% of them are going to their local, a school in their district that has an IB. My daughter went to IB. She absolutely used choice in a traditional public school.
Yes.
So I think that's an important information to arm yourself with.
So you brought up teachers and teacher salaries. So I think it's important to point out the difference between the staff they hire at our traditional public schools, charter schools, private schools. So, of course, you have to be certified by the Board of Education in the state of Florida to be a teacher in a public school, whether it's a charter school or a traditional public school. That's correct, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, there is one caveat, though. There was a reporter that did a study that found that, at least in Hillsborough and Pinellas, that oftentimes the teachers who taught in charter schools were those who were disciplined in the traditional public school and couldn't find
Well,
a position. Now, that being said, with the teacher shortage, with where we are in teacher shortages, that may not be the case now, but I think that was 3 years ago that she did that study and discovered that.
wow. But a private school does not have to meet any requirement for their faculty. Their teachers could be certified, they could just
They
be
could,
somebody's friend.
yeah, so they don't even have to have any college. In fact, we have a private school in Hillsborough where one of a student who graduated from the private school went back that next year and taught high school biology.
Okay, so that's one really big difference between the private schools and the public schools.
Yeah. And that's
That
the challenge, is most people think of a private school as as elite, right? But those
Mhm.
schools are often charged $40,000 a year. And even,
Right,
to Amy's point earlier, even for us, like, my public school had the best options. My public school offered the most AP classes, offered the most opportunities for my child. I have a child that graduated at 16, and the best place for him was his public school. They offered him the most options. We looked, and that was the best place for him. And yes, charter schools do have to pass tests. That they do this similar assessments. But in Florida, charter schools are considered public schools. The difference is how they're governed. So charter
Mhm.
schools have a non-elected board that doesn't that and their budgets don't have to be public, their meetings don't have to be public. So it's really the huge difference is in the governing.
Okay, and charter schools, while they're nonprofit, sometimes they're managed by a for-profit business. Is that an accurate statement?
Mhm. Yeah. I forgot the number, but the vast majority of them are managed by. Do you remember, Amy? Carol just said it on a call with us.
No, there are so many numbers floating around my head. I'm sure I always have to look them up when I'm in a presentation, so I say the right numbers. But the other thing I think we're kind of tracking that we want to alert you guys just to be paying attention to is the fourth quarter calculation hasn't been released yet from Florida. So when we're talking about that calculation 4 times a year, the fourth quarter is the last one.
Right.
The school districts that's usually released end of April, beginning of May. Here we are sitting in July. We're all kind of assuming it was the budget thing, that took a lot of time and attention away from things, but that still hasn't been released. And that is concerning because that means money for our school districts that they probably already spent, right? Because they've already educated all these students from fourth quarter. But so that is something, if you are a school board watcher, you go and watch or you talk to your school board members, that's a question I would definitely have a conversation with them about. Hey, what's the status of this? Do you know any information? Have you heard? We're watching this and kind of trying to do some research on that. So we'll release that. Like I said, information comes out daily about it. Minute by minute, it changes. So, like we just have an action that we released today that we share with you guys.
Yes, I saw it.
But yeah,
I just want to reiterate what Amy said, that people need to realize that public schools offer a lot of choice for our students. So if you have a student who's like, into the dramatic arts or whatever, you can, and they're going into high school, they could apply to go to Dillard, or, we have all kinds of, and you said magnet programs and so forth, like I worked at Atlantic Technical High School, and that was another choice that students had. And we were very successful, having a very small, it really was wonderful for those kids. They got a lot of attention. But again, we didn't accept every kid. We had, they had to have had a C average. They had to have had a certain score on their, what at the time was FCAT when I was working. So, and we're getting down to the last, just one more minute. I just want to ask one thing about this federal voucher. So does that mean the federal government is giving us voucher money to put in our voucher coffers?
Sort of.
or-
So it's a tax credit. So basically what it is now is that individuals can donate up to $1,700 to a scholarship funding organization, and that money needs to be kept separate from all the other vouchers. And then that money can be used to provide vouchers to students in that state. So I could donate to Step Up for Students $1,700. It would have to go into a separate account, and it could be used to go to a voucher to students. Now the thing is it has to be at least 10 students, so they have to have enough money to give vouchers to at least 10 students, and then it needs to be at least 2 different schools. But it can be double dipped. So this can be money on top of the money they're getting from the state of Florida. Now, all of that being said, this was passed in the reconciliation package, and the reconciliation package can't have any policy in it because it wouldn't pass the Byrd rule in the Senate, which basically says you can't have policy in the reconciliation package. And so because of that, there will be regulations imposed on this, but we don't know what yet. And that's going to be a point of advocacy moving forward. So there is some opportunity because of this federal voucher program that we could get more federal regulation on vouchers, which could be interesting to see play out because we have almost none.
No, I would think there'd have to be a cap. Otherwise, a billionaire could come along and, give $1 million.
Initially there wasn't a cap, and initially there were, because of advocacy, originally there was no cap on how much they could, well, there was 5% of their income was the cap, right? So yeah, that's a lot of money for a billionaire. And there was a loophole for capital gains tax. And if you know anything about donations, there's no other place you donate where you get a dollar for dollar tax credit. That's unheard of. And so it's actually significantly better than it was. Not perfect, but.
Gosh. Oh, we do have one more question. When school grades are released at the end of the year, are charter school grades included in that report?
Yeah.
So the A grade that Broward Schools includes the charter schools. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, sometimes when they give you statistics, you really don't know what you're looking at. A lot of us, just. All right.
Yeah.
So there's many thank yous in bold. Thanks, Carrie. Thank you, Damaris and Amy. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. And I want to thank everybody who signed on tonight. And don't forget, this was recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. I'll send you out the link. And we'll share it also on our website so that others who couldn't be here tonight will benefit from this. So stay tuned. We always have to be aware of when we can take action and not feel we're powerless. Because as we showed, or as Damaris was saying about all those people complaining about that money for the AP programs, it really did a lot of good. And people who knew legislators came back with the information that get these people off of me already. So, the squeaky wheel and all. And thank you so much, everybody. And have a good evening. Thank you, Damaris and Amy. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Have a great
Okay.
night.
All right, you too.
Thank you.
All right.